Operations Committee meeting, Tuesday, May 1st at 4:30 p.m. Real quick, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from last month's
Move
or
it.
last meeting.
I see a typo.
Second.
Can I
All
change
in favor?
it?
Aye.
All right. We'll move into our items here. Kingsley is here briefly before he has to leave, so we are going to jump down to number 3 and go through some of the playground information first.
Yeah, as I contacted you earlier, I'd like to have Jenny Mittenmeyer join the discussion as she's a member of the playground committee.
Yep, Jenny, you're welcome to come to the table and join the discussion, but I'd like to hear what Kingsley has put together here, and we'll start the discussion here.
So I'll go real quickly over just the document that shared the memo. I already saw a typo that I added in there, so I apologize. There's double ands right there, so I thought I looked over it a couple times last night. But basically,
Excuse me, if you're going to invite Jen, can we invite the rest of the committee? Ben and Ellen are both here, they're both on the committee as well.
Sure, absolutely. If they want to join your...
The crowd too, if you have a question, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Didn't mean to exclude anyone.
Well, they're here, come on up, Bill. We're going to do it.
so we talked about, in the memo that I shared, it's just basically the start of the committee has really focused on, we started on August 26th, and I see no typo, it's August 16th. So we started on August 16th, and ultimately, while the discussions first led to a more in-depth conversation about accessibility, it's really focused on inclusion. And so as you read through the minutes, you see that articulated, but as you look through some of the changes that we've already been able to make on the back pages there with some of the playground policy handbook things, it's really focused on accessible and inclusive for students of all abilities. And so that's where the conversation has now focused on. Our draft recommendations, as you can see below, are one, change to the policy regarding process to make sure it's more inclusive, change to playground handbook regarding inclusive language. At our last meeting, we discussed RFQ to assist community in designing district inclusive standards for playground areas. And then lastly, consider other funding sources to help address budget constraints. And so those last two pieces especially, I think is going to help inform the first two pieces, but we're still in the process of what that looks like. For our next agenda, we'll be focusing on developing the RFQ to get some type of expertise to come in and talk about what inclusive language looks like, some standards around what we can possibly have from a district perspective to ensure that the conversation inherently has inclusion from the onset. And then also we want to focus on costs and how we can, at the end of our conversation last night, we focused on, maybe the cost is in itself a constraint. And so how do we have a different conversation? What are some other funding sources? What do we need to do to maybe look at a larger budget or what that looks like? And so we're going to have those two big conversations next time.
What is the number one recommendation? Which process are you trying to make more inclusive? The design process, the whole?
Basically, we're focusing more on the planning committee. And so when a lot of the conversation focused around just the PTO and parent involvement and student involvement and teacher involvement, who should actually be represented on that committee. And so a lot of it is focused on how, and actually you can go to the page right now, it's in the back of the book, or back of the handouts. If you go to page 5 out of 9, and I left the track changes on there so you can see the changes that we've made. We included a lot more staff, and so special education teachers, physical education teachers, general education teachers from different grade levels, students, parents. We also wanted to ensure that the committee received guidance from playground experts, director of special education, physical education coordinator, landscape architects, equipment designers, and/or playground planners. And then ultimately, in order to quickly kind of get people trained up on what we're talking about as far as playgrounds, really starting the conversation like a workshop. And so I think it was highlighted at our multiple meetings, and one meeting in particular around kind of the city high and how those changes or potential planning and designs has gone out for just community to look at and see and have questions about. And so having a similar process or workshop around that, I think one, kind of engages community members in a different way, in the community in a different way, but also presents a workshop where individuals can kind of get, I wouldn't say trained, but just have a little more education and understanding about what the process that they're about to go into. I think that's just going to help overall, kind of heightening the level of awareness for folks going into this about the focus on inclusion, the focus on accessibility, and what that looks like, and how we can make sure we have as an inclusive playground as possible.
So I need to get grounded again. Sorry,
Yeah.
Kingsley. So number one, the policy is this is the handbook. Is
That's
there
not the entire policy. Those are just the changes that we made.
Is there a separate policy, or because it's
That is the policy.
so the handbook
Yeah.
is the policy?
Right. I'm just saying that's
Got
not the
it.
full handbook.
Okay,
I just put the
understood.
places where the changes
Okay,
were.
so I just was trying to get clear if we actually had a policy that was governing then process and procedures, and it sounds like no, it's a handbook, and that's kind of the, okay.
We put that together about a year and a half ago. Rick Hansel was pretty involved in that. He's not here today, but I don't know if that ever got adopted as a formal policy by the board, did it, Steve? I think that's
No.
why we call it a handbook.
Yeah.
So that's where I was confused on language, so thank you for clarifying. It's a handbook, it hasn't been made a board policy.
It's not a board policy, it is our handbook for our playground, our working playground.
Okay,
And the differentiation here is when and I can change that to playground handbook, the changes to the policy, in the planning section of that particular policy within the handbook, we made some pretty distinct changes within there. The changes for inclusive language for the playground handbook have to happen throughout.
yeah, and I appreciate those changes around the inclusivity, and I think that's really important. My second question is, I'm not familiar with request for qualifications.
Yeah, Joanne, you want to talk about that?
Well, as opposed to request for proposals, when we have I'll just use architects as an example. We have a pool of architects that we rely on for design work. There's like 17 architectural and maybe 12 engineering firms. But to get into that pool, we initially sent out a request for qualifications, and most of it was based around what's your school experience, what's your school design experience.
Got it.
So that qualified them to be in the pool from which we can select
Okay.
proposals or
Okay.
firms to do design work.
Okay,
Makes sense?
yeah. And so you're suggesting that process, getting someone to come in and advise on what inclusive playgrounds look like, helping to create those parameters and guidelines for all the schools going forward before they start embarking on their planning process for their playground. They've got some of these recommendations in front of them and things that they need to be paying attention to. Am I getting the gist?
Correct.
And that every time a school would be considering building a playground, a new school or a refinement, we'd have this workshop that you were describing that would
Correct.
kind of help people understand what the process is. Okay, I just need to make sure I was understanding.
No, that's
all
fair.
that.
No.
So that's I think all fantastic. I think one of the things that's top of mind for me is the Longfellow playground, and of course they were ready to bring forward. They had brought forward a consent item. We pulled it, wanting to get this update. I don't know the timeline for that. I know they're hoping to have it in place for the beginning of the next school year, since that school's under renovation right now. It feels like, from a proper process perspective, we want to go through this, get the RFQs, bring someone in, help us with the guidelines for inclusive at playgrounds and stuff like that. But I don't know if we have the runway to do that and meet the timeline for Longfellow. So I'd like to hear people's thoughts on that.
Well, from my position, no, we don't have time to do all that and get it done in time for school this fall. School starts, 24th of August, something like that. And even though the vendors in their original proposal said they could produce the equipment in 4 weeks, experience tells us it takes sometimes 6 to 8 weeks to get the equipment on site. That's just part of the equation, because we also have to put a contractor in place to prep the site, to get the concrete work done, to finish the drainage tile, whatever surface we put down underneath the playground. So it takes a few weeks to get that accomplished. And actually, if we go much further than May, we run the risk of not having a playground there the day school opens. Because that basically gives us 2 months. And that's really pushing it tight. And I just don't think there's time to do this. I think they had a very thorough process there. Can we look at it, maybe embed it? Yes, we've already asked the playground companies to do that. They're looking at it right now, as I understand. So there might be some room for improvement. I'm not saying there isn't, there always is, but if we take the Longfellow group through the entire process, the way it's outlined in this handbook, it will not be ready for school this fall.
But are there some things we can do to mitigate the risk of building a new playground that's not fully,
Well-
you know, we know it's ADA compliant, but our goal is to be better than that.
And we appreciate that, and everyone on this committee is in agreement that it can be better. I don't think there's one of us that said it shouldn't be, okay? That what we have done, and we're putting together the design concept for the areas around the playground, the accessibility to the playground, all that. We're putting in there a couple alternates so that we could possibly do one. There's 3 main areas, actually 4 with the grass, but 3 play areas for play equipment. We're hoping to do one with the engineered wood fiber. We're hoping to do one with artificial grass turf, like AstroTurf, for lack of a better word, and the other with rubber. And it could be tile or it could be poured rubber. We haven't determined that yet. So the designers of the actual project are doing that right now, so that we have options on midday. So the board has options, and they know exactly what it's going to cost. I think those options alone make this a much superior playground than what it would have been with just wood fiber. I think that's what the board was looking for, and I think we're all leaning kind of towards the AstroTurf. The AstroTurf seems to be it's gaining popularity around the country. It's an ADA approved surface that's it takes less maintenance over the years. There's some maintenance involved, don't get me wrong, there is. But I think that it's a surface that will show durability.
Well-
Backing up, the point is, if there's 3 different surfaces at one particular school, it also is kind of a demonstration area to see going forward which surface we may prefer. And you can always go back and change it. You know, you're not set with one. So they all have a life cycle to them.
And just to correct Wayne a little bit there, the committee hasn't leaning one way or the other on any surface at this point.
I didn't say that they had, so you don't need to correct it.
You said they're leaning toward the AstroTurf surface. You may
I
be
said
leaning
we
toward.
were leaning toward it.
Okay,
I'm not speaking.
I didn't know if you were speaking for yourself or speaking for the
Certainly not
behalf of the
speaking for
committee.
you.
Yeah, and the biggest thing I think to take away from the update is that in our last meeting, we recognized we've seen some expertise to help us on this. And granted, we are up against a construction schedule, which board members are gonna get used to this, especially in our accelerated plan, all the way through. So this is the things we run into. I think there's time to give it a little more time. Now, I understand the concerns of getting there, and, you know, we're at that point, but I think a little bit of more time isn't going to cost us anything, and we can hopefully make a better decision. I would hate to be in a situation where we push something through and then we haven't gotten anything back from the DOJ on their recommendations on what we have, on what they would looked at,
When
any
are we
recommendations from
expecting?
them.
I thought we were looking for something back from DOG sort of by the end of the school year. Shouldn't it be any time now? Don't know?
They have extended their response time to indefinite.
Yeah, it could be at any time.
When-
They're
when
dealing with their
was-
own issues in Washington right
Of
now.
course.
It's
So we're
significantly
just
changed.
waiting, in a waiting
So
game.
when were we made aware of that she went from May to 11?
I mean, we haven't gotten an update yet. I mean, it was told to me it would be around end of school year, May, June, but I haven't heard
Or when
any
they're ready.
information back, yeah.
And I know from talking to colleagues in other parts of the country that are
Well,
waiting out information now.
Also, just having
Responding.
this qualified assistance with our committee, making some recommendations and looking at that, I think we would have some benefit, because you nailed it perfectly that as far as accessibility, it's gonna be accessible. Inclusion is where we're working on that. And my feeling is that if we can get someone quickly with the committee and work on that, we can help on Longfellow before that horse is out of the water.
I've been thinking about this a little bit, because, you know, we went through this at Shimmick where it was the deadline, you know, and once they got to the point of, we might not have a playground in the fall, it was, sorry about everything else, this is our goal. So I understand that to tell Longfellow they're not gonna get their playground in the fall is not good. But I do think that there can be sort of a compromise on maybe looking at some of the equipment. And what I've thought of is Jennifer Skolsky, who is the expert that we're going to, we had contacted her about Shimmick last year. And what she had gotten, or what she did like an inventory of all of the play components, and it has the name of the play component, the experience, the location, and the use of it. So this is something that the vendor could, most likely get to you guys quickly, and they should have on hand for all of their equipment. So what it does is it shows, like at Shimmick, we have, 10 climbing, 3 slides, 1 balance, 1 swing, and it shows that, 4 of these you can access from your wheelchair, and the ones you can access are a bell, a drum panel. So I think that you could reasonably look at each section and say, well, gosh, this 4th to 6th grade section has, 7 climbers and it doesn't have a spinning experience. Could we maybe just swap? So, ideally it would be done over, because I'm looking at it and it from thinking about Shimmick, and it kind of makes me sad, because I feel like a lot of the same mistakes and the same we're done over again, and I feel bad for the Longfellow family, but I don't think it's fair to put them through the experience of having to do it over again. So this, to me, would be a very reasonable way to look at it, and maybe that's something that we could do at the committee if you brought this, or we could just look at other pieces of components to try and add stuff, or because that, and this is where we come into needing an expert, is we're learning that it's not just about equipment, and it's not, there's social needs and sensory needs and motor development needs, and and they need to grow with the child and with challenges, and it's really interesting and overwhelming. And that's kind of the missing key between inclusive and accessible that we're missing. So I don't think we're going to get that perfect balance of fulfilling all of the developmental needs in a progressive way, but I do think that you can reasonably look at the inventory of equipment and say, okay, we've got a lot of these. Maybe we could swap it for this. Maybe we can take out a climber and put in like a playhouse.
So I'd like Ben to address that part.
Yeah, so point of clarification, when we do the design, we basically get the idea of what the structure is going to look like, and we usually submit that to the board before working out all the details. Part of the reason why we do that is efficiency. We don't want to wait 2 weeks for it to go to the board and then a week for it to come back to administration. So during that time, what we're actually doing, this is a combination of myself, the playground committee at the school, and the designers is going through and actually looking at those developmental things. And we actually put together lists like that, or usually it's our certified inspectors that put together that list, and we identify places that we're missing things and we could do more developmental things. So like Jen actually hit on one of the things that came up with Longfellow, and that the 4 through 6 doesn't have a spinning element. So that's actually what we're working on now, is trying to figure out how to fit the spinning element into the area, and looking at the equipment and seeing, okay, we got 3 horizontal climbers, we can get away with 2 of them, so we take one of those out, we swap one in, we run it through the PTO, we figure out what they want. So a lot of that stuff does happen, it is happening right now. Longfellow is actually first on the list because of its need for the playground, whereas the other schools, worst case scenario, we can go another year. But Jen is right, you need to go through and look at those things, but it is happening, it happens kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, I like the idea of sort of a compromise at this point. I mean, I think, at least in my experience going through this kind of RF, I'm not familiar with request for qualifications, but I know a sense what that process is. That's going to take some time, and it's going to take some time for whoever we hire to come up with a set of recommendations for inclusive playgrounds and that kind of thing. And I really don't want to get in the position of Longfellow not having a playground because we took that time to get it right. I think we can make some improvements through the process that Ben and Jen are describing, of looking at what's been proposed and refining and looking at the various components as you described, and getting the input from the vendors and or a local expert that can advise from the playground committee. To me, that feels like we're moving it forward. We're not putting Longfellow at risk. It'd be nice to know sort of how much time we have to work with realistically through this process, so that we don't miss any. And I think we probably do have a little time. I think we can push ourselves a bit. But then I think the next step, and we recognize the Longfellow process isn't perfect, but it's moving in the right direction. Then we follow these recommendations, get those set of guidelines around what inclusive playgrounds look like. So we inform and educate parents and these committees before they go build and design another playground, because we don't want Shimmick again.
Right.
I don't think we want to do the Longfellow way again. We're setting up people's expectations, and they're getting disappointed throughout the process.
The expectations were vague, I think, is what it was before. And I think that that's where the workshop component is going to be helpful, because then everyone gets the same information at the same time.
I think it's fantastic.
So,
I think it's really good.
Dwayne, before you say, I just want
Well, I'd like-
I want to address not that comment, but just some other just clarification. So just to be clear, because I think that in general, there's a lot of discussion around the community about what the DOJ is and isn't going to do. They're going to focus on accessibility.
Yep.
I mean, so that's...
They're gonna
that
focus on the compliance
didn't-
piece.
Yeah, they are only going to look at compliance. They're only going to come and talk about
Right.
compliance.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that that's been like thrown out there a lot as far as them going to like change the nature of the playground, and that's not going to happen. And that was clear not only from, you know, the brief conversation that we had, but just in general, from if you look at their website, they're only focused on, again, clearly defined laws and what they're going to look at. The other piece I would just say, and I just feel like we dance around this inclusive piece, but only when we're talking about certain things. I just want to make sure Longfellow is included in this process. And so, like, we're bringing up our expertise or discussion, whatever the case may be, but I don't see Longfellow at the table. And maybe I'm wrong, and so maybe there's people here that are.
I'm a Longfellow
focusing-
parent, but
yeah. So
I'm
I didn't
not
know
part
that.
of
So
that process of
I
designing
just want to
the
make sure
playground.
that as we're making changes, so to speak, which is fine. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter because I think ultimately we're looking at a better process. I just want to make sure Longfellow
Yeah.
is included in some of those decisions,
I think
just to make
that's
sure that they're part
perfect.
of it as
I
well.
think that's right on.
I would offer this to you, because I know what's going on in the background. I think from our perspective, again, my perspective, not the committee, but mine, I think it would be possible to present you with some diagrams, maybe some 3D images showing you what has been planned.
Or maybe sort of that inventory kind of thing that you were
Right.
just
And I think
describing.
a lot of those items are included in this. There are many different ways to meet compliance, many different ways to make it inclusive. There are both elements in this playground. Maybe we can, in between now and the next board meeting, pick out a few of those, and make some recommended changes. But I'd really love to see this move forward, because you just don't want to open a school without a playground. And not to complicate it, but we have 3 other playgrounds this year that are in need of replacement as well. Morlock has a playground that's 24 years old, and it came from Roosevelt. It's that old. It's a new school with an old playground. It's worn out. Kirkwood has a section of their playground. It's worn out. And not compliant. Whoever has a section of their playground, it's worn out and not compliant. So not only do we want to accomplish Longfellow this summer, there's 3 others. Now, can those 3 wait for the process? I think we can do. It's not the best, but we could. But Longfellow's the one that you really don't want to deprive those kids of a play space from the school.
How
So,
old was, if I just sit there for a quick second, how old was the equipment at Longfellow that was removed?
It was
Well,
pushing
some of
25
it-
years.
Yeah, some of it, we don't even have exact dates, we can only go off of old aerials. going
Well,
back.
that's some, but there were other parts that were relatively new.
No,
The
virtually
Spider-Man
nothing.
thing was
What was the date?
I couldn't tell you offhand.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
Part of the issue with Longfellow though was it was not ADA compliant, and we couldn't make it ADA compliant, so that was a deciding factor, and that was actually on the newer composite structures, not actually on the older composite structures.
Okay.
So that's part of that deciding factor.
and as far as, was that stuff sold or scrapped? Did it end up at Peterson's, or what happened to it, because it was an asset?
That's part of the construction project.
It's part of the demolition and property of the contractor that did the demo work.
So the contractor got it.
The timeline piece, I just want to make sure, because I know we're talking about compromise and diagrams, but again, I just want to harp on the Longfellow piece. And so any diagrams or conversations, I think, needs to go through Longfellow.
I agree.
Before it comes to the board. That's all I was saying. I just want to
And
make sure we do that.
I agree with you, Kingsley, and the board meeting is less than a week away, and whatever, I just don't know if we have time to get it in front of the board through this process by May 8th.
Certainly could do it at the next one.
May 22nd. I think we target and that's the action item meeting anyway. It gives us 3 weeks to kind of get through that process, and that feels good to me. And we can target that
Yeah.
through this, that feels good.
And,
We'll get it done.
you know, when we talked about this at the, previous meetings, right? Like the end goal that we're looking for is ambitious, right? And we talked about the need to take multiple steps to get there, right? The work that's done in this handbook is it's very prescriptive around the process, which I think is very good, right? So that you're starting any individual project from a better place, and I think that's great. But it is not prescriptive per playground, right?
Correct.
It's not
Right.
saying these playgrounds need this stuff. And I think at some point we will have to have at least some sort of guidelines on there, and it sounds like why we want an expert to help us
Right.
with that.
Exactly.
But each process moving forward will be done better of what
Yep.
what the outcome is it will remain to be seen. And
Incrementally
as far as
improving
Longfellow
every time.
goes, that process, as it's described in here, was probably not followed all of the new changes and stuff, but there was a process that was followed. So I do see that if we stop and try and make Longfellow the very first one out of the gate with our new process as the one that we're gonna fix everything, we've lost sight of our ambitious end goal, right? And we will falter everywhere else. So we have to make appropriate steps to make sure what we have at Longfellow is an inclusive playground. Again, you're right with the input from those folks that are going to be using it, but it's just not going to be able to follow the entire process
Right.
that we have here.
Right.
So I think we need to do our best attempt at, okay, what else can we do as far as the process between now and, 3 weeks from now, to see what,
Yeah.
what can we get little steps wise and not try and bite off everything.
I think it's important to remember when we develop grounds, this is true of playgrounds or soccer fields or whatever, we try to make those as fluid as possible because we know they're going to change. We know that there's going to be building additions and stuff. And so if we do go ahead with Longfellow prior to getting the process in order, it doesn't mean that it's locked in there forever. We can always go back and we can update, we can change and whatever. There's certain things that would be difficult, but it's still very possible to do all those different things.
The one thing that I did notice that I would just like to stress is the lack of wheelchair accessible, like independently accessible components. And we need to do like more boards and stuff like that. But we talked about the need for dignity, and if you've got this whole entire playground, and that was one of the things I pointed out to Dwayne with the way the 4th to 6th grade was set up at Longfellow, that you couldn't get in the middle. We talk about, we have Students Against Hate and Discrimination. We're trying to build communities and stuff like that. Yeah, we're designing playgrounds. To me, it looked like a paper, and he did describe. But where we have a child who could just basically circle and not get in the center of play, and they talked about spreading it. So now the child can get in the center of play, but there's nothing that you can access from your wheelchair, and it doesn't have to be a board. If you put in like a like a hut or something, like a playhouse, or so that's what I'm saying. Like I hope that because it's great. Longfellow now has elevators. So Longfellow, you didn't have people, our students in a wheelchair Shimmick was initially a Longfellow student had to come to Shimmick. So, so I know that this is out of the range and not something we would think of if you're, not in that position. But so that would be my hope for Longfellow is that, now that we've got students who could possibly, use mobility devices, that when we're looking at things, we're making an attempt that, those children have things that they can get to in their mobility device. And, a 6th grader in a wheelchair doesn't have to be carried around by a parrot to interact with his friends.
Right.
So like I said, it's not, I don't think we have to set the bar here, but I think we can make some small improvements to some components just so everybody feels like they
I
are.
think we're going to decide specific elements at this
No,
table.
but that
It's
was-
just that, I assume playground committee's meeting again at some
Yes,
point. Are we
we're-
waiting
we're-
until we
it's-
have
it's-
somebody to come?
Who's going to interact with the Longfellow design group to provide this kind of input? Is it you guys? Because you're working with them already?
We are.
Okay.
And we've already started redoing the playground areas. It's already,
Okay.
and spreading and doing different things. And he's already asked the vendors to look at
Okay.
elements that can improve it. I saw an element at the North Bend playground. I thought it was a great piece that might, if we could work it in, but it's expensive, So I think if we should go ahead and start the meetings. We're not meeting again for
I mean, until May 14th.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
So if we could start the process, and if we want to bring what we've done to the playground committee on the 14th, I have no problem with that, but that wasn't.
No, what I heard from at least moving forward Longfellow is, we can figure out a compromise as far as what we discuss as far as like different items and components. I was just saying, can we go to Longfellow with that first before it comes to the board? That's what
I
I was
think that's right.
Absolutely.
I don't necessarily know that it comes back to the playground committee at all
Right.
because
We'll
of the
take it
time.
then.
You'll take it to the
I'll
You're
make
working with
sure
the
we
Longfellow
get it.
design team. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we're in agreement that we're going to move it from the 8th
To the
to the
22nd.
22nd for Longfellow.
Yep. Yep.
Well-
And now we just throw one other thing out for the playground committee's consideration. I'm still a little bit hung up on policy versus handbook. Maybe we would consider an inclusive playground policy, not unlike we have our LGBTQ policy or statement, I guess, that we approved.
Yeah.
I mean, It's something to consider. Is that something that we want to try to put out there as something that we support from a policy
We
perspective?
can discuss it at the committee. I mean, we can look at some conversations around
Some
that.
language.
Yeah.
There was 3 other playground items I just mentioned we posted today, so you might want to look at those too.
Right.
Yeah, so we can look at that.
Yeah, now I see that the Terra discussion is supposed to, this is our place to have that discussion.
We had, it kind of bridges the gap, I think, a little bit between this one and our vendor preference one. We can talk about it
Thanks,
Well,
Kingsley.
in either place.
I think the local vendor is one discussion. The Terra contract is a discussion in and of itself. As far as how it originated, it was a no bid contract. It was for 158, 152, what's the total?
It was 168. Feel different numbers, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
158 is close.
158 was what it went to. I asked for an RFP, there is none, correct?
That's correct.
I asked for the emails, are there any emails at
You
all?
got 50 of them this afternoon.
Excuse me?
You had 50 of them this afternoon.
When did I receive?
They're not loaded. They're not loaded to board docs. I've got to go through and make sure there's nothing in there that needs to be redacted that would be identifiable as,
Okay,
but I can have them to you tomorrow.
Okay.
I've started that process.
okay, all right. So I have the email chain on that. Okay. I went to the Terracon website. Terracon's a national company, 140 offices. They have a search engine on their site, as far as services. Put in playground testing. Closest thing that came up was swimming pools. Can you tell us why we chose a national firm to provide a service for us that isn't even on their website that they provide, and why did we do it in a no-bid fashion?
Well, first of all, are you asking me?
Well, I'm asking anyone here that worked on the contract. Who worked
Well,
on the contract?
I worked on it.
So, and you solely?
No, I had assistance with vetting. But first of all, Terracon started in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So let's get that straight. That's where that company started. That's the genesis of that company. They have grown into a national company. They're well known in Iowa. They're well known in the Midwest. They're an accredited testing agency. They do all kinds of testing. And they have the engineers and liabilities insurance to back up what they do. So, and backing up even further, you say no bid. Well, and frankly, the law says you don't have to get a bid for professional services. You and I've had this discussion. You may not like it. I may not think it's the best policy, but it is what it is. So we were able to do that. Was it the best solution? We could have gone to Intertech, Braun Intertech, another regional company or national company that works here in Iowa. We could have went to Shive. Shive, however, they do design work for us, and I see that as a direct conflict of interest when you have a company doing both design work and testing.
Yep.
It truly is. It's just a conflict of interest. So we have, on purpose, used Terracon because they're totally independent. We get totally independent results, good and bad. I get them every day. Every day I get deviation reports on concrete testing or bolts or whatever it is. They've been nothing but stellar in their performance to the district. So I asked them to come to the office. We had face-to-face. We had 3 face-to-face meetings, and I've said this to you. And I said, what can you guys provide us? What could you do for the district? Because we're trying to be transparent. We want to test our materials. We want to get out in front of the DOJ if that's the issue. And nobody seems to believe that engineered wood fiber is an acceptable surface when it is, if it's done properly. I don't know if it's done properly yet because we haven't tested it yet. We've gone through a system where we compact it and roll it. We're in the process of buying a roller. Last year we rented one. And I don't know if it's done right yet, and I won't know until I get that test result. I trust what those people do. And I said, is this something you're comfortable doing? And if so, would you provide us with a proposal? And in the proposal, yes, we're paying for the equipment, but it doesn't really come out and say we're gonna own the equipment. So at the end of 2 years, we don't like what we're doing with them, we can bring the equipment back home and do it ourselves or find somebody else. That's part of it. The other part of it is it's a per inspection code. We may only do 6 or 12 the first year, based on what the results are. We're not gonna spend $158,000 this year, or even in 2 years. We'd have to do 25 inspections 4 times a year, or something like that, to make it, to get to that number. So it's a top dollar. It really isn't what we're gonna spend. I was very comfortable in the per inspection price. And then I'm very comfortable with the engineers, the qualifications of that company to do whatever you ask them to do. They're professionals. So,
We are an operations committee, and so the reason I said we should put this on here instead of at the board table, because I think it does come into play in how we do vendor things, whether it's, you know, buildings or processes or whatnot. And so I would steer the conversation away from, okay, why did we pick this company over another company, and more towards, if the policy that we have is not giving us the result that we want, then we should look at that, right? We don't need to debate whether Terra Cotta's appropriate or not at this meeting. If, you know, law says we didn't have to bid it, and our policy didn't tell us that we had to do something different, and we did everything right, and we still get to a point where you're not happy with the result, then we should look at the policy and see if that's something we need to better design. But I don't feel the need to go back and, we voted on it, we picked them, that's who's doing the testing.
I think the process at which this was gone about was flawed. And we used the taxpayers' funds. There's a person that provides services similar to this, not completely, but then again, Terra Cotta doesn't provide them now at all. They have to go through the training, and we're buying the equipment for them.
We're buying the equipment for ourselves, it sounds like, because we own it.
Well, if that's in the contract, this contract is as flexible as Nadia Comaneci. But normally, if I were gonna sign a contract and I was gonna retain the equipment, I would have that specified in the language. Granted, if it's not in there and the two entities have a meeting of the minds and they agree to it, it's there. But if it was me, I'd have that specified that the ICCSD retains ownership of the equipment. It's purchasing for a company that doesn't provide the testing to now get the training and the equipment to do the testing. You follow me?
yeah, so a letter to that effect could be provided to the board.
Excuse me?
A letter to that effect could be provided.
Super.
Discussion.
When we go and choose a winner on you can say it's gonna be less than that, but we approve that amount. So
So
that
not to
amount can
exceed.
be, that amount can be incurred.
Yeah.
And it was a no-bid deal, whether it's legal or not, it's wrong. For a public entity to choose a private business to be the winner in something, and now, we've opened up a whole new revenue stream for a business that can advertise that they do this service for the 5th largest district in the state of Iowa. And they can do it nationally now, in all 140 outlets. When a local, like I say, when a local business vendor is shut out of the process, and his tax dollars that contributes to our bonding and all of the things in our schools, and his kids go to our schools, and he's shut out of the process, I think that that's wrong for us to be making those decisions. That's my private citizen view and my single opinion as a board member.
We've had discussions at previous operations committee meetings over the last 5 years and talked about this very issue and talked about local vendors, outside vendors, talked about policies, but nothing's changed. I have to follow the law, I did, and it may not be what you want to do, change the policy. I'm perfectly fine with that. I will say, and I know we're not here to talk about specific vendors, but I'll reiterate, I would never recommend a company that does design services to do the testing. Enough said.
The superintendent's directives, 3D5. The superintendent shall approve for the board in advance the execution of any contract or agreement equal to or greater than $25,000.
That would be why it was on the agenda.
Okay. And you were perfectly cool with the way this process went through and everything like that?
We followed state law, we followed board policy.
Okay. So it's a policy issue that we don't bid, because, and I've talked with other boards, smaller boards than ours, and there's boards that won't spend a dime without 3 bids.
So
And
I think it is a policy discussion. I mean,
Okay.
and if we want to, again, exceed what is in Iowa code because of our values and practices in the Iowa City School District, I think we've got the opportunity. Is it a policy? Is it a new superintendent direction? Is it, you know, we can decide what we want to do, but the point is we haven't changed it.
Item 5, the kind of the district policy that we would potentially be looking at.
That's one area.
I mean, I really think if that's the target, if we want to
Because these,
change the process of how we go about.
these are purchasing guidelines that the administrative team put in place to ensure a higher level of compliance
Yeah.
with the board direction.
And it's just for
Because-
capital improvement. This
Right, right.
particular contract would not have fallen under this set of guidelines. So, so that's something we can look at.
These actually, just so you understand, these guidelines exceed the requirements of the board policy. So this holds us to a higher standard than the board currently holds us to, because when we looked at it, we thought that we needed to add some additional definitions and some additional levels that were in there that are not included
Right.
in current board policy.
So after the board meeting where we voted on the contract, I know Craig had sent, I believe it was Craig that sent, basically
Yeah.
listing of, here's the law, here's board policy. He probably alluded to this document a little bit, and I think it was kind of, and this is sort of just standard procedure of what we do, which is kind of at a different level. And I think we just need to look at those, all those pieces and make sure that everything in the end gets us to whatever like firm level that we're feeling comfortable with, and still be able to do business. And I'm not sure if it's the policy part that we need to look at. I guess that as a board, that's the part we get to look at for the most part. And if it's not stringent enough there, that's where we look to try and fix it. And I was trying to find it earlier today. And
This is
we
back
get
to
lost in
our
policies
crazy
sometimes.
Carver structure. You
find it.
can't find anything. Sorry for the,
It does make it very difficult.
makes it
because
hard.
You gotta look in, I know Bill was looking in directions, then there's also the legally mandated policies, you got a whole slew of them in there, and so you've
Yeah.
gotta look a lot of different places to figure
Yeah.
out how that works.
So process-wise, it's an operations type thing, but it is policy stuff. So
Right.
where do we blur the lines between our committee and policies and out there, right?
You do one, two things with that. You can either send some ideas to policy and governance, so if you wanna spend some time working on that as a group, you can certainly do that, and then send a recommendation over to policy and governance. Or you can ask policy and governance to look at it and give them some parameters within which they would design that. So either one of those routes is perfectly applicable.
Well, we've got to change what we're doing, in my view, and that's just my view. We have got to be more transparent, and we can't have these things that, I tell you, as a taxpayer, I'm curious on how this works.
So we kind of wrapped Terra Cotta specifically into the local vendor stuff. I think that that's the next step is I will kind of go through and look at policy and kind of try and tease out where the relevant pieces are in it that we would want to look at. And I think as operations, I think we could still look at that and say, here's a part where we need to maybe make it more strict, come up with some ideas. And then I think we can discuss that at the maybe at the board table, and then send it to P&G to.
I think,
Look at some of those
I think
edits.
ops, I would prefer ops committee to look at that
Well, I
before,
think we wanna look
again,
at it
before it
first.
goes to
Yeah, I think we
the
want to look
board
at it first
table.
and come up with some framework, but I think it's still.
And there's
needs
bound to be some samples out there that we could look at that other districts use. I mean, I know ACT's
Well-
got a sourcing policy and a whole set of standard operating procedures around supporting that policy, and it's pretty standard stuff, I think.
I want to be mindful of, what these guys are doing, though. I mean, it's not wrong to say that it's okay to use people that you know, right? It's just not. I mean, that's the way a lot of people do business. But if the process is potentially limiting great folks that can do some work for us, we shouldn't stop that. But, you can't fault people for sticking with what they know. I mean, that's normal human behavior. So I think we can't be so prescriptive that we can't get anything done.
That's exactly right. Best policies
But I think there's
expedite, create
definitely room for
velocity. They allow
improvement.
people to get
Yeah,
work done.
But I want everyone not to lose track of the fact that this is something completely new, that we have created a new thing here. And it wasn't the type of a thing, we didn't Google search it and say, oh, this is the company that provides this service, we're going to them. We went to them and we said, okay, yeah, can you do this? It's kind of in your sphere of what you do. You test soil and concrete, can you come out and do this? Well, we don't have the equipment. We don't really have the training on it, but it is close to what we do. People come to me and say, can you work on a Mercedes? Well, I haven't. It's the same as pretty much everything else. I don't specialize in it. This isn't even that. I mean, this is testing something completely else. But no, like I say, we've got to get into this. And what you were saying about what other districts are doing, Highland. I was told by Tim Ruth, who came in and gave the presentation on the Home Building Association. When this came up, we were talking about the home building thing, and he said, for crying out loud, you watch their meetings. First thing they say is that everything is a 3-bid. And they say that when they go through. It's much smaller than us. Maybe the smaller districts are more mindful. I would like to think that we're as much or more because we're dealing with bigger figures. But
Small districts may not have the same stable of suppliers with a long history of quality delivery and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think there are significant differences between large and small districts.
Just one word of caution, there are a lot of projects we put out where we request more than one bid, and sometimes we only get one, sometimes we only get two. Don't say you have to have three, because you may not get them.
Yeah, there has to be an exception process. If we get that prescriptive, there has to be an exception process, because not everything's gonna flow through that way.
It's one thing to go out and solicit quotes or bids. It's quite another to have them actually return them to you.
I understand, but in this case, there was none.
Well, but there's.
And in this case, it was a 0 bid.
And
We can move on.
We'll work on making it better, and I think we're probably to start that. I will go through what we have for policy and find all the sections that pertain to this, and we'll kind of work on that, and maybe just at the very next ops meeting we can bring it back and kind of look at those pieces and see what we want to have on there. So I'll sift through our policy. That sounds like a good night to speak. I'd like to keep moving. I know we've got some folks here who are interested in the item that was number 1 on our agenda, so we'll get back to that. So I'm going to talk about the safety and security task force that we talked about at the last OS meeting. Today got added to the board docs the short thing that I put together. We tried to have I wanted it to be clean, like a vision and purpose kind of thing, but at the same time, not so short that it was giving 0 direction on it, was kind of my aim as we went through that. We talked about it in our ops committee meeting, we talked about it twice at the board table, and then we sort of solicited some feedback from the rest of the board on kind of things they wanted to see in a charter of some sort for this task force. So what is attached there is what I put together. Kind of the key points that we were taking out of it is the difference between feeling safe and being safe, and why those things are both meaningful, but very different things. So trying to have some context around that is what we put in there. One thing I wanted to make sure that we included in kind of the questions that are being asked, you know, and try to get answers from by this committee is, as you come up with a solution for one particular problem, does that come into direct conflict with the solution for another particular problem? Because sometimes they will, whether it's a personnel thing or, you know, facilities type thing. We want to be mindful that we can't put fixes in for all the various problems if they're just creating more problems. So wanted to get that in there. I know JP had some suggestions of just kind of some wordings that he wanted to sort of see scattered throughout there. So I tried to include some of his thoughts on there. So the docs and board docs, so I'd welcome any comments on it. We could wordsmith the heck out of it if we really wanted to,
Yeah.
or we could,
I think.
do we have the gist of it at the
I
very
think the gist is good. I like the inclusive group of stakeholders that you'd include. I think I'm looking more, a little more tactically in terms of, does the task force report out to the operations committee? Is there a chair? Who's going to chair it? And who's going to go through the process of identifying the stakeholders and convening the committee? And sort of the tactical ways in which the committee's going, or the task force is going to operate, and to whom do they report their findings?
When I met with Steve about it, and he kind of talked about how they went about coming up with the playground committee, for instance, I think it's sort of identifying, I guess we're kind of moving into the second step on our agenda there,
Sorry.
how we plan it, but it's identify the groups that you want at the table, and then try and specify the individuals that make up those various groups, and probably sort of let them take off from it. It's a good question, do they report back to ops, or do they report back to the board? I mean, we'll have a board member, I think. So.
I think one of the things that came up the last time when we were talking about this was two distinct groups. So Phil had talked about a task force to address this particular issue led by the board, but then also an advisory committee that would function like IPM or the playgrounds or equity, that was an administrative committee that would be an ongoing process, but that the task force had a fixed task in front of it with an end date on it.
So that should be specified in the
Yeah,
charter
that was
then for this
that
task
was the
force.
nomenclature that we talked about, because this group has a very specific task in front of it, and at some point, they'll hand that baton off to the advisory committee for continued ongoing
Yeah.
feedback as we move forward. Did I get that?
Yep.
Capture that?
Yeah, and, you know, I know we used to have a safety committee. I don't know if it has met recently. We used to have a safety coordinator.
Yeah, that was before I was here, so it's been
I
quite a
was
while.
reading the operations manual, which is on our website. Another good read for everyone. To try and come up.
101.
Specifically, I was looking at it as, what are some ideas we can talk about in operations committee? But I get down to the section on the safety committee, which is in the operations manual. There is one sentence that says the operations or the safety committee will make some recommendations. So it's there.
What's really happened over the last few years is that it's morphed into a physical threat safety.
Right.
And we.
It's a
we
workplace
meet-
safety
and
issue.
Got it.
Dave leads that, and we meet regularly.
Got
How
it.
often do we meet?
Multiple.
So it's been a very active.
But
committee.
there's
It's not just internal
no
kind of thing.
community members or anything like that on it. It's just staff.
Internal.
And I think that's probably a good thing to have.
Which we should have, absolutely.
But that,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the fact of it. It's kind of morphed into that, and that's what's been active. And our guys are pretty good about bringing issues to us about, they see a safety issue out there.
So this advisory committee is new too? This proposed advisory
That would
committee?
be new, because that's a safety and security issue when we think about it from the standpoint of students and staff,
So-
certified.
Because
staff
it's,
Should we-
the task force takes the immediate, okay.
But should we form that committee first if the task force is reporting their findings or recommendations up to this?
Well, let's go back to our last meeting. I think the discussion
Sorry.
was
I'm so tactical sometimes.
create the task force because there was sort of an immediate
Right, sense of
moment
immediacy.
Okay.
issue, that it would then morph into an ongoing committee after kind of a
There
deadline date.
There were two
But we don't
really
have to go that way.
high-profile issues that the task force had, I'm looking at my notes, had talked about addressing. One was school resource officers, and one was anything that could be considered for hardening the building.
Right.
So there were a lot of different things that were suggested at that point in time, everything from bulletproof glass, et cetera. So, so those were the two things that the task force, that was the sense of immediacy, was, do we need to have a conversation about school resource officers, and do we need to have a conversation about additional things that can be done to harden the structures? And then the behavioral piece, that was let's move that on to the safety advisory committee, because that's everything from Alice training with staff to students to other types of
Right.
behavioral things that we're gonna do over time.
Climate survey result
Right.
findings, things like that, yeah.
Exactly, so, and Phil, jump in, I'm just trying
No, no,
to speak
you-
off my
yeah.
notes. Those are the things that I see.
So, but then this task force is broadening its scope beyond those immediate things that came up that the community.
Or they could
responds
delegate
to.
some of those things to the advisory committee.
But the advisory committee doesn't exist yet.
Right, that would be part of our next step. I mean, they may have to come out of the tunnel together,
Okay,
if you will, with some tasks
Okay.
over here, especially.
I think
the
it would be
task
nice to
force.
see both charters,
Yeah.
to see kind of who,
Sure.
and who reports to who, and who,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
frequency of meeting. Again, I'm sorry to be so tactical about it, but I don't like creating task forces and committees who are gonna go do a whole bunch of work and spend a bunch of great time, and the material comes in, and there's nowhere for it to go.
Right, or they're at odds with each other because they're doing the
Right.
same work
I mean,
simultaneously.
we're gonna bring members in, this robust group of community folks and schools, staff and stuff. I mean, we need to be really clear on what they're doing and how they're reporting and what their goal and task is. And if this is an ad hoc task force to answer some specific questions, I think that should be reflected in the charter.
Well, I agree that that's how the conversation went at the last ops meeting. And as Paul pointed out at the board table, that conversation was very focused on active intruder type scenarios. It was. I mean, the whole conversation surrounded that, and that was top of mind for everyone at the time.
Well, and communication, making sure that all, at the time we were looking at scenarios, things that had happened and were in the news, and that's
So,
what really brought us.
there's-
Excuse me for interrupting.
But my point is, since that time, there has been input given that if you solely are looking at that, you could be creating other issues, right? And so that's why we're kind of looking at a more broader based approach, and maybe it's skewed from the task force to the committee already over time. I'd be leery to say, give this task force this very specific agenda without the rest of the context, because you potentially not be able to respond to any of those suggestions, because then you have to run it. So trying to do two different groups simultaneously.
Well, and you weren't at that meeting, Janet, but Lori was here, and Lori was on the Bell Schedule Committee. And they were given a very narrow charter, okay,
Yep.
look at our Bell schedules, that whole
it was
question.
a singular problem
And
to solve,
They
and
met,
they went and
they
did.
worked very hard, and they came back
Yeah.
with some very, very positive results, and board action was as a
Yeah.
result of it, and we went forward. That's kind of how, with Lori's input on this, that's how, we were looking at the task forces, like, okay, we're gonna look at these things specifically, work on that, and recognizing safety never goes away. It's always changing, it's always evolving, so the need for something having continuation was in there. And I know we kind of, focused on that, but it can be given greater range than just those two discussions, as far as resource officers or hardening of buildings and things like that. And resource officers is going to be a big discussion that has percolated in a couple of times in our discussions over the years. So, you know, as far as how you go about it, you could, you know, if you want to have the charge of the task force doing that, or if you want to just say, well, we're going to form the safety committee, the first two things we want them to go to is this, and then you just work down on the others.
I guess what I put together there, from what I'm hearing, is probably more descriptive of farther down the road.
The advisory committee, I think so too. I think we should start with that and get clear on the scope of that advisory committee with a sense of urgency, right? I mean, I'm not saying kick this can down the road, I'm saying maybe take this charter, turn it into the advisory committee, get that group formed, and then kick off a task force to talk about SROs if that's what the highest priority item is that people want to talk about. I'm just thinking out loud. I just don't want to kick off a task force without clear direction of what their goals and objectives are, and get a bunch of smart people that are really busy in a room spinning.
Right.
A lot of this is operations of the building and how do you make the students feel safe. But there's a big part of it too, is it isn't just intruder safety, it's storm safety. I mean, or do you feel safe in the building if you have a storm shelter or not? Things like that. So,
Well, just to give you a quick example on that, when you think about safety overall from that global perspective that you were talking about, when we're working with law enforcement right now on how do we move ALICE training from staff to students, we are actually looking at a series of videos that we would use to help bring our students up to speed, which include the 5 elements of ALICE, but also include tornadoes and fire drills. And then the idea would be that you run the video training, you have the Q&A format for the students, and then you have, where appropriate, drills that follow up. So when you do the tornado training, you do the tornado drill. When you do the fire training, you do the fire drill. When you do the L in ALICE, the lockdown, you also do a lockdown drill. So to that point, and maybe to that broader piece in here about what does it mean to feel safe and what does it mean to be safe, when we started working with law enforcement, we looked at it in a much more holistic standpoint, because they'll tell you they respond to fires, they respond to tornadoes, they respond to violent intruders, they respond to, and so their thought was we need to look globally at school safety, and so that's been our take with them as we're moving forward, is to try not to restrict it, to try to look at it in a global sense, which is why I like the idea about the difference between being safe and feeling safe.
And
I
you
like
know,
that
you
too.
look in the climate survey, you know, going to the bathroom, their fear is that someone's gonna jump in there with a, you know, it's, do I feel comfortable and safe, you know, and that way, and that is.
So I don't want to go back to the drawing board completely, although school year's almost over, the next time we're gonna meet is probably gonna be after the school year starts again, but it's almost the feel safe and be safe part is almost the difference between the task force and the advisory committee by the tests that we're talking about, right? If we're going to talk about resource officers and metal detectors or what other random hardening the buildings, I think is what we call it. If those are the things we're going to talk about, that's more the being safe than feeling safe, and the other stuff that we've talked about is very separate from that. So I don't know, we're disconnecting two things that I personally don't feel comfortable disconnecting from each other. But
So then can I just have the one committee?
Without a task force?
Well,
The-
all this.
But the committee, if you form the committee can decide to spawn a task force if there's something specific they want people to go work on.
And I don't want to get hung up on the vocabulary. You know, with IPM, that started off as a big thing, then it kind of came in, and then it got smaller and got broken up into two. I don't know if this is the type of a thing, if we start out here and we bring it in, you know, we can say task force charged with this, go make those decisions and that, morph into the other, or you work them
Yeah.
simultaneously. I just think it's important that.
One benefit of the advisory committee structure is that it has longevity. So that, my only fear with the task force is from people on the outside looking in, they think it's a one-off
Yeah.
and then we're done.
Yeah.
So I would suggest if we're looking at it from a long-term perspective and we recognize that dealing with student staff safety from that standpoint and our intersection with local law enforcement and emergency responders and things like that, I think that I think forming an advisory committee gives us an opportunity to invite some of those folks in. We now meet regularly with the Iowa City Police Department, where before it was an as-needed basis. Now we have a structured,
That's good.
regular standing meeting with them. But it would be a great opportunity as we think about an advisory committee. We may not need to have representatives from every law enforcement agency, but we might want to ask them to delegate something to. So I started thinking about membership categories, which you and I talked about while we were thinking about who's on here. But that's one of the I think one of the larger benefits of an advisory committee. I mean, you might even have a rotating law enforcement seat and ask the various law enforcement agencies we work with to have somebody in there. On this year it's the North Liberty seat, next year it's Coralville seat, and it's the Iowa City seat, so that there's a constant presence there, but we get representation from everybody. I think there's a significant benefit from thinking about that in the long-term framework. Board representation, community representation, student representation.
So,
And Phil's right. You could not have a task force and simply say to the advisory committee, two of the first things we want you to address are
exactly.
school resource officers and hardening the facility. And then let them decide how they want to go about doing that, but give them the charge that first two things you need to do are these. There are many other things that you may want to do, but you need to do these first. And just give them a task right out of the
I agree.
chute.
I like that idea.
So, try and put a bow on this, so I'll get done before the next meeting starts. The charter that I put together, maybe remove the task force words, but it's more holistic kind of look at it. Are we good with that? And put it together and have a board representative on it to be the liaison, whether it's with ops or the full board. I don't really have a preference on that, I guess, but get that committee together and started and focused on the first couple tasks we want to address, whatever they may be. I don't want to specifically designate those two things as the first two things, but if that's what they want, I mean, I foresee having that group get together and throwing out a whole bunch of stuff and seeing what shakes out as these are the top two things we really want to dig deeper into. Maybe not be quite so prescriptive on that. But as a general committee, we're sort of okay with it. I mean, I don't know what we do with it.
Who takes the
So
lead in
it's pretty straightforward.
forming the
You
committee?
give me the direction, and it really
Okay.
is no more than what you're doing right now. And then, just like with IPM or the playground committee, I'll designate an administrative liaison for that. You let me know who the board liaison is for that. First thing they'll do is go through and develop the membership categories. We actually started a process so that we can vet that, so that we ask people to tell us if they would like to be on it, not just go out and pick people,
Yeah,
but
I think
ask
that's
people from
good.
the community to self-nominate. And so we go through that. Then we try to make sure that we have as many groups represented as possible, but still a reasonable sized group. Now we have the committee constituted, they've got an administrative liaison, they've got a board liaison, we've got all those folks that we need to on there. We've got some idea already what their charter is, because that's always the first thing that we ask them to do, but in this case, there's a draft, it's ready to go. These are things that the board would like you to consider. We
That's
let them
good.
go through the process of doing that. I might have been too directive in saying the SROs and the school hardening, just because I know that was a significant topic of discussion. Like Phil said, it was really topical because it was right on the parkland issue. So maybe we just say to them, these are the things that we want you to address, and if those things come up, that's great. If they don't, I'm okay with that, and if we want to let them direct it. If the board says, and this is something we've done with other task forces, if the board or advisory committees, if the board says, but this is something we want you to address, then we hand it over to the advisory committee, we ask them to calendar it and get going on it.
That's good.
So if you would like us to do that, I am more than willing to get started on that, and I'll get you an administrative liaison.
Go do.
And then one of the things that you'll want to do when you report out on the 8th is ask for a board liaison. So you want to select that. You may want to solicit people ahead of time to see if there are one or more than one that are interested in doing that. And then we'll get the board liaison named by the 8th. I'll have a and then meet and ready to
Good.
go.
All right. We're at a place to get started and really start the ball moving. I know summer, is kind of tough to get people together in any sort of committee type thing, but if there was any ability to get some folks together to have any sort of recommendation prior to the start of the school year, it'd be nice to do that, but it's tough.
Yeah.
We gotta get started here, so. All right. I think we'll move on. Kind of did 1 and 2 there together. So the last thing on our agenda is IPM update. It's a nice synopsis
Yeah.
Dave sent. So thanks. I think probably just have any questions to ask him.
Yeah, any highlights you want to hit or additional questions?
Well, we've got 2 board members that weren't part of that process. If you could just tell them what we did, what we went through,
Okay.
what we came up with, what we have,
Okay.
what you're doing, what you're improving. 20
Well,
minutes or less.
definitely. In 2016, there were some concerns expressed about pesticide use at a particular school, and then as the discussion started, pesticide use in general in the school district, and it led to some discussions about whether we were doing integrated pest management correctly or not. We had a board policy that said that we should do integrated pest management. I think from an indoor standpoint, we didn't really understand what that was. And from an outdoor standpoint, I think we were doing a pretty good job of it, but maybe there were some lapses here and there. And so we certainly had some visible issues at one school. So that got us to the point where, on a temporary basis, we went to a pesticide ban, and for a period of time, we did not apply any pesticides. A task force was formed, a quite large task force, a very diverse group, to take a look at not only the philosophy of IPM, but also putting together detailed procedures for operating within the district, both indoors and outdoors. And so the task force met several times. We split into a couple of smaller groups and met a couple of times. And we did make some progress in understanding what it was that we wanted to do, and for those of us that didn't know, like me, just exactly what IPM was. And we developed and approved a new IPM policy for the district that was a little more detailed. And basically what it says is it just emphasizes the philosophy of IPM, which is to use all means possible before applying pesticide. And that pesticide is your last resort, and the reason for that is that we're working around children who are especially susceptible to chemicals, and also because some of the chemicals that we use are just not real well understood. So, probably 6 months to a year into the process, we reached the point where we really were working on some pretty detailed procedures, and we kind of split into a small work group, and we've been working on pieces of the procedures since then. We worked out a communications piece, and we've been using that. We worked out some things that we wanted to do on the outdoor program that were slightly different than we were doing before, but actually we learned that Ben and his guys were doing a really good job of applying IPM. We did try for one summer running with very little pesticide application outdoors, just to see what impact it would have on the grounds and the labor required to do things completely without pesticide, and things kind of got away from us. So the decision that we reached was that we would do several things. One of them's mentioned in here. We identified some no spray zones around the playgrounds that we would definitely not apply any chemicals in that area. We jumped on board with Dr. and Cheyenne at UNI and committed the vast majority of our just general playground area to be completely pesticide free, and that worked out well. And that included virtually all of our elementary schools and large portions of our junior highs and high schools as well. It omitted some athletic turf and some other specialty areas like that, but the vast majority of the areas that the younger children play on are being managed without pesticide. And as mentioned here, we plan to expand on that a little bit this year as we bring Liberty and Hoover East on board. So that's going well. And indoors, we've learned a lot. We've found that we don't need monthly spraying to control pests indoors, and we've also learned that by applying the philosophy of least toxic chemical, we can go from a spray to a bait, which is just a little gel formula, which is much less volatile and less likely to affect children. So we've, in all the cases in this school year, the applications have been baits instead of sprays. So we consider that to be an improvement as well. So now what's left is...
We also changed equipment applications.
We have done that. Yes, that's right. We've got some different cleaning equipment than we had in the past, and that's definitely helping us out. So what's left to do is to finalize some of the indoor procedure. We've got bits and pieces of it, but we need to write the rest of the procedure to link it all together. I've been within just really close being able to go live with the website for the last month, and we're just not quite there. Our plans are, we're currently trying to schedule a task force meeting for the end of this month, so that one of the main tasks in that meeting will be to review the website. So we need to get it going here in the next week or so that people will have a chance to see it, and then our plan was to exercise it during the meeting and get feedback on it, and hopefully improve from there. So that's where we're at. We have hopefully come a long ways in not only our how we've implemented IPM, but also in earning back some trust from people that were kind of suspicious of our actions for a period of time. So.
Well, and it was a very educational committee to be on. I learned more about...
It's been interesting, hasn't
it? Yeah, I learned more about cockroaches than I thought I would. It is an interesting fact with cockroaches. If you have 49 cockroaches, or no, let's say you have 26 cockroaches, and you have two structures that will hold 25 cockroaches each, they'll fill 25 in one, and then they'll go to the other one. So they get along fairly well in the group. We also learned how
I'm imagining a
the
little hotel with 25 cockroaches now.
Interesting.
There's more.
Right, exactly. And doing it, and I'll tell you, if you guys have done the bills as long as I have, you would have seen that there has been a change We used to, there used to be, spray, it was routine to spray every school.
Every month.
Now, we have gotten down to, there's sometimes that, we have a Asian or German thing we treat, so we've gotten out of that just.
Different kinds of cocktails.
Thank you.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So I can identify.
Language is important when you're dealing with bugs. So, and I don't know if it's Mandarin Chinese or the others, but anyway. So, we've made strides. I'd like to think that we can get to the point, some point, too, outside where we expand our spray-free zones as well there. But there's things to do it. We found that dandelion, nobody dies from a dandelion, and that it's just there's issues that we're doing there. When it ended, though, I thought I was on the outdoor committee still, and I haven't gotten any updates or anything that they're meeting. And he used the task force word. So with that one, I'd like to know, because I just like to sit in, get the email updates, so I can just sit in and listen to the conversation, everything going that way.
We've just been meeting as that very small work group of.
Yeah, well, like I say, I thought when we were ending up, I was part of that small group for the outdoor area. So if I could be informed on that. But thresholds became very important, maintaining thresholds areas. We had food carts that were, cockroaches or travelers, they were going in their cardboard boxes and things. So there's a lot of things we learned that way. And there were some things as far as cleaning food service carts that, with air and things along those lines. To do that, and changing the thinking of going from just reaching for a can of spray to you work up. If it's something we don't want wasp nests in our buildings or for our workers around that, but if it's the type of a thing, how do you go about eliminating it? If it's something that can be eliminated without resorting to something we go least harmful going up. But I would be interested in seeing what opportunities we have going forward to get to a point, because and Kenny we also utilized a lot of expertise. We had Schnorr from Iowa State, we had Kenny from UNI, and so we utilized people who had done it. We weren't trying to just create this on our own, and they were extremely instrumental in the success that we got. But I would be interested too, going forward, what steps we can do to get to, ideally, we'd like to get to a point where we're chem-free on our grounds. I mean, that's the ideal, that's the goal, the shining light on the hill. Knowing that there's ways to get there. And there are places that do it. Canada doesn't spray on their public grounds. The state of New York doesn't. And, they still function. So I'd just be interested going forward, Dave, if there's things that we can do to expand that and increase the amount of areas that we don't spray.
It sounds like we are increasing the no spray, right?
That's our plan, is to do that. We don't want to move too soon and find out that we can't manage it with the people we've got, but we're going to try to slowly creep those out and expand those areas.
Two questions. One's, hopefully they're both pretty quick because we're kind of up against it. With new construction and design, I know one school has like a barrier, something around that.
You want to tell them about that, Ben?
Yeah, so the new buildings and existing buildings are slowly integrating IPM buffer strips around the building. Apparently insects, rodents don't like crossing ground of rock. So essentially what this is, we come out from the edge of the building height. We're shooting around 18 inches to 24 inches. We go about 4 inches down, backfill that with rock, and it acts as a natural barrier for rodents to get in there. Of course, we put fabric underneath it to help minimize the weeds that grow in there.
So we've done that at Liberty, we did that at Alexander.
Grant has it.
Grant.
So we've actually spent
New
a
Hoover?
significant amount of money
Yes.
to to do that, and it's strictly for prevention of pests.
Boardwalk is projected to have it done this summer.
Yeah.
So,
So that's great to hear. It seems like a simple thing if it works, right? I mean,
Yeah.
not free, but
I don't mean to brag on my help, but with Dave McKenzie and Ben Grimm, they've done a real service to this district with the work they've done with IPM work. I mean, it's working and they make it work. I don't know that we'll ever get to that 0%, but they're certainly doing a
And
good
the
job.
progress is very, very impressive, and the very methodical way you're going through, putting the procedures in place, and it's sustainable. Your process is sustainable with the work that you're doing. I think it's fantastic.
And the last question I have, and it's kind of answered, I guess. I know there's the policy and then what's in process, right? So I guess I would ask, how are we making sure that, everybody's following the IPM policy? I know that no spray signs is actually kind of nice. I've noticed them as I've been around the school, so I think that's a nice visual cue. Hey, don't do that here. Are there other things in place to?
Well, I know like our
Physical
staff, we meet
Yeah.
every 2 weeks with all the leads. And Phil brought the WAS, we use soap water mix now, and that's brought up constantly to
Yeah,
them.
that happened because we went around the district and collected all the cans of water. All the various locations.
We had
If you
grass,
take all the stuff away.
we had grass in boxes in their truck to spray, because they deal, like the heating and cooling guys deal with it every day. So, but our craftsmen and our custodians are really our first line of defense, and they've all been properly documented.
And we keep an eye, Ben keeps an eye, we've had parents come in and spray. And Ben will call immediately when he sees that. He can tell when somebody's sprayed an ornamental garden or something in that. And so we keep an eye out pretty good. Dave keeps an eye out on wandering cans.
Oh, I'm always picking up ant traps for.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate what the committee has done to really get the ball rolling and what you guys have responded with. I think it has shown a great improvement, and to Phil's point, how do we keep moving it forward? Because if we do this good so far, we probably push the envelope a little bit farther, so keep up the good work on that. Any more questions on that? All right, so we'll run to the agenda setting, but it sounds like a lot of the topics that we had tonight are gonna get kind of revisited again. I think maybe we should set at least a tentative date, or how far out we want to do this. We were trying to do it quarterly. 3 months from now puts it, puts it the first Tuesday in August, but I'll be in Florida. But I don't know if we want to push it to September to be on a quarter, as the school year's running. Would that make more sense?
That would be September 4th.
That makes sense, everyone?
I'm not going anywhere.
All right, let's target that as the date at the very least.
Say it again?
September 4th?
And I barely know what I'm doing tomorrow. She's checking out her calendar 4 months ago.
It's a day right there.
Anyway, topics, I think we're going to, like I said, I will go through our policy on purchasing and vendors and things like that, and put something together to come back with, so we can have that discussion there. What kind of language change you want to see there? Would we also revisit the playground, or would we get more information?
Well, we could definitely have we should have an update or, absolutely, yeah, exactly. We're, by that time, we're gonna have Longfellow's gonna be done, and that, so definitely we could have a discussion at that point. Another one I'd like to put on there is the Hy-Vee warehouse.
And what's that topic about? Just help me, I don't know.
Well, it's $14,000 a month in debt to the district, and as far as savings that we have achieved with it, are we utilizing the facility to all it has to offer to the district that way? Definitely, I'm concerned that we have somebody there that ought to be parking there. Okay, good. Well, I don't want to be the type of thing where it turns into a parking issue, especially when you're paying $14,000 a month for it.
One thing I would like talk about at some point, and I see a lot of things blur the lines on what's in operations versus a full board and things like that, but I would like somewhere, and we can start at operations, have discussion on gender neutral bathrooms.
Sure.
I think it's, you know, we're doing a lot of construction projects, and if there's ways to make that happen, I would like to see that.
It's happened.
Yeah, and I would, you know, I mostly I would like to know, you know, where are we at and what are we trying to do now? And,
Yeah.
You know, so
Well,
we
there's some new ones
maybe
I
it's
saw
just
at
an
West.
update at that point.
Well, yeah.
West High,
West High has.
City High referred the boys' bathroom this fall to a gender neutral, yeah.
So I'm glad we guys are doing that.
And we're having discussion.
Whether or not we need any more specific direction on how much we need or want or whatnot, but I think, yeah, an update of where we're all at. Sure. All that would be
And,
good.
and another one, and I don't know if this is operations or if this is the board or if it's the FMP, but I brought up the need for ag education and FOK space in our schools. And it's coming. And it's gonna be difficult for us as a district to get a qualified instructor in if we don't have facilities to do a program. So I think we gotta really have a serious discussion on that, and that's on where and, you know, what type and everything that way, so.
Yeah, it's a lot of ideas, so when it gets closer to that date, I'll work with Kim and make sure we got probably a couple update things and then a couple of discussion topics, something like that. Go from there. Otherwise, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.